Patch 6.5 is titled Garden Party. There are so many substantial changes, but before we get to that, let's admire the beautiful piece of art that, once again, Exist has made. It really captures a lot of the spirit of the new patch, showing off the new Pokemon items and features. Bellsprout is one of my favorite Pokemon, and I love this little Bellsprout. It is absolutely incredible.
Yo, someone just got me this plant. Make some noise for this plant.
Shoutouts to Exist for knocking it out of the park 4 times in a row, but we've got a huge patch to run down, so let's get started with the new Pokemon being introduced in this patch. We're going to start things off with the 1-cost commons. Here is the Chespin line. It is a grass fighting Pokemon. It's got very solid stats for a 1-cost unit, and it's got the ability Spiky Shield, which we've seen on a few Pokemon, most notably Maractus. Not the most impactful ability, but overall this is a very solid frontline early game unit, and it can definitely enable some of those grass fighting comps that technically have a good amount of overlap, but we just don't see very often. But yeah, a very solid early game frontline unit, especially for grass teams. Next up we've got Smoliv, Dolliv, and Arboliva. They are a regional grass normal gourmet Pokemon. Their signature dish is olive oil, which increases dodge chance. Probably not going to be your first choice for a signature dish, but it can definitely be annoying and you can use it to troll your opponents in the early game. But what's really cool about Smoliv is that it has the ability to Rain Pulse, which activates a grass field around it, and it also propagates other field effects that may be active in your team, and then it triggers some effects based on whatever field your Pokemon have. Previously, the status fields were only active from various unique Pokemon, so they were pretty rare to see in a game, but now with Smoliv and some other things being introduced in this patch, the status fields are going to be much more prominent. It's also nice for Gourmet Synergy to get an early 1-cost unit, something that they've definitely been lacking before. But aside from its very cool ability and Gourmet Synergy, Smoliv has some absolutely abysmal stats, especially that 25 speed stat. I wouldn't be surprised if people accidentally lost to the early game Spearows. I haven't tested it yet, but I have a feeling that Smoliv can't outduel a Spearow. But despite that, I think Smoliv is a great addition to the game. Gourmet finally has its early game enabler, and I'm excited to try this little guy out. And lastly, we've got the Blipbug line. And who the heck is this little freak? I ain't ever seen this before. It's a regional bug psychic Pokemon with some pretty solid frontline stats. And just like Smoliv, it has a very cool field status based ability, Expanding Force, which gives itself or spreads its psychic field status to other allies. And then all allies that have Psychic Field will deal damage to adjacent enemies. In a dream scenario or prolonged fight, Blipbug can be absolutely devastating. A very high damage potential, but overall it's probably not going to be too impactful. And another thing that should be mentioned is that when Blipbug is fully evolved into Orbeetle, it gains Flying Synergy, so that means we have yet another Flying Bug unit. But with that, let's move on to our 3-cost rare units. There aren't any new 2-costs, so let's talk about Drillbur, a ground steel ad pick. It has pretty poor stats for a frontline unit, but a very cool ability. Drill Run deals true damage and swaps Drillbur's position with its target, and it will cast again if there is a target behind the unit that Drillbur swapped with. So that means Drillbur is very easily going to be able to infiltrate the backline of your opponent's team. And I also forgot to mention that this ability can crit, so you can do some pretty cool crit builds with Drillbur. I'm definitely very interested in seeing this guy in action. Let's move on to Silicobra and Sandaconda. Another ground ad pick, but this one has Amorphous Synergy. It's got okay frontline stats, and an okay ability that deals damage to up to 3 targets, as well as inflicting the blind status. Overall, just a decent unit that can be pretty annoying to some specific teams. And we've got one more 3-cost ad pick in Nimble and Low Kicks. It has Bug and Dark Synergies, which makes it a pretty easy bug to position if you are cloning it. It has solid stats for a bug unit, and its ability targets the enemy with the highest PP. It deals damage, burns PP, and also has the chance to confuse. It doesn't stand out too much to me, but definitely not bad. And overall, Skorupi now has its best friend. Now let's talk about Roggenrola, which is a 4-cost epic Pokemon. This is getting added to the regular Pokemon pool, and it has Rock and Light Synergy. 2 synergies that are definitely going to enjoy having a new unit that's always available. Its stats aren't amazing, but it has a lot of potential with those synergies, and also a lot of potential with its ability. It has a huge damage potential, throwing multiple rocks at random enemies. It's going to be especially powerful against clumped up teams, raining down a ton of rocks that can deal a good amount of damage. Because of how easy it is to access Roggenrola, it's going to be a fantastic late game light synergy filler, and hopefully it's going to help out rock teams a lot, which could often struggle to find solid late game units. Definitely one of the additions that I'm most excited about this patch. Let's move on to unique Pokemon, and there are a ton of new unique Pokemon. First off, we've got a new ground unique in Dunsparce, and it also has normal and flying, though it's probably best utilized in ground teams because it has an evolution method. We'll definitely talk about a reworked ground synergy later, so it will make a little bit more sense then. But basically, Dunsparce is all about digging holes. Its ability deals true damage and breaks protect status, digging the earth underneath its target. If there are any buried items, it will destroy them, and its ability will deal double damage if its target is on a fully dug hole. Again, that's going to make more sense when I go over Ground Synergy's rework, but overall just a very fun and disruptive frontline fighter. If your team has 10 fully dug holes on its board, Dunsparce will evolve into Dunsparce, just gaining a nice chunk of new stats, defenses, and attack. Overall, just a very solid ground unit. Let's move on to Pachirisu, which is pretty much just Raichu, though it has normal synergy instead of fairy synergy, and it also has the chance to find you a citrus berry after every fight. Not really much to say here. If you played with or against a Raichu, you've pretty much already seen Pachirisu. It just has some citrus berry utility, which I'm told is a reference to a VGC set. Nice to have these little Easter eggs or references for Pokemon fans. And we've got another electric rodent unique in Dedenne. It also has fairy synergy, as well as slightly better defenses than Pachirisu, and a pretty cool single target damage dealing ability that improves based on the number of adjacent allies that you have. Dedenne will gain shields by having adjacent electric Pokemon, and gain healing with adjacent fairy Pokemon. Not super impactful, but definitely more to think about if you're trying to maximize the use of your Dedenne. Not too much else to say here, so let's move on to the final electric rodent unique in Togedemaru. This is an electric steel unit with the ability Zing Zap. It has almost the same stats as Dedenne, but its ability is pretty different, dealing damage and rolling behind its target. It also inflicts flinch, and if its target is paralyzed, Togedemaru will gain 40 shield. This paralysis shield gain seems pretty niche and isn't going to be super impactful, but it's once again something that you can be rewarded for utilizing. Let's move on to the final unique addition in Phalanx. It is a fighting steel unique. It is a frontline unit that doesn't have the best stats, a notably low HP stat, but it has a very cool passive effect in which Phalanx troopers will show up in your shop, and if you buy them, when fights start, they will join up with your main Phalanx and improve its stats, gaining shields, attack, and defense. They also improve Phalanx's ability, which causes it to gain a bunch of stats, and then deal damage for every trooper that's part of your Phalanx. Phalanx is going to eat up your bench space, but it's definitely worth it. Not only are the extra stats very nice, but this improved ability can be extremely powerful. I'm very excited to play with Phalanx. It sounds like a lot of fun, and I just love the very unique Pokemon. I'm going to keep an eye out for you, Phalanx. But for now, we're going to move on to our final new Pokemon. It is a legendary Pokemon, Buzzwole. This thing is super weird looking. It's basically just a very beefy frontline bug fighting unit. It's also got a pretty boring ability in Bulk Up, but it definitely has a very strong attack stat. With the right items, Buzzwole can definitely become an absolute stat monster, but overall just kind of there to increase the pool of bug legendaries. That's okay though, not every unit has to be as cool as Phalanx. But that's pretty much going to wrap it up with new Pokemon. Now, normally I would now talk about the changed Pokemon, but two Synergies have received some major reworks this patch, and a lot of the changed Pokemon have been made to reflect these new Synergies. So for this video, I think it makes more sense to first talk about the Synergies and then the changed Pokemons. Let's start with the new Ground Synergy. Ground Synergy is now all about digging holes. Welcome to Camp Green Lake, because your ground Pokemon will now be digging holes at the start of every round. Holes take 5 stages to be fully dug. Ground Pokemon will gain stats for being inside holes, gaining defenses based on the depth of the hole, also based on how far into Ground Synergy you are. And at the maximum depth of 5, they will gain a flat amount of attack. At ground 8 synergy, your ground Pokemon will also gain bonus defense and special defense based on how many fully dug holes you have on your board. And if you have at least 12 holes at maximum depth, they will also gain a plus 12 bonus attack stat. So if you have enough holes dug and you're at ground 8, your ground Pokemon can start the battle with a huge boost in stats. And if you're somehow able to fully dig out your entire board, your ground Pokemon are going to start every fight with an extra 39 defense and special defense, as well as 20 extra attack. This is pretty much old ground synergy at maximum stats, but you're getting this instantly at the start of a fight. To me, this sounds kind of overtuned. I'll definitely need to play some more ground games to confirm, but this amount of stats on your entire team is just kind of crazy. And not only that, but when your ground Pokemon fully dig a hole, there is a chance of digging up a treasure. You can dig up items that will just give you a flat amount of gold, relatively useless items like trash and leftovers, but you can also dig up a fossil stone, which is pretty fun. But the crazy things you could dig up are a treasure box, which is the Xatu carousel item, an artificial synergy item, which can be super impactful, a big nugget, which can give you 10 gold, and there are 3 synergy gems to dig up, which will permanently increase the synergy level of the respective synergy gem that you dug up. This can be absolutely insane. A lot of these synergy gems can really impact your ground team. Dragon gems can really give you a lot more versatility in shaping out your team. I played a game where I had ground 8 flying 6. There's rock gems, which have great overlap with ground synergy. Overall, I think ground synergy seems pretty bonkers right now. It might be a little bit more challenging to do an early game win streak with ground now. In fact, I would consider ground synergy to now be a lose streak oriented strategy, where you're trying to dig as many holes as you can early on, and then when you get to the late game with all your extra synergy gems and items and gold, and also considering how a lot of the ground units are just very solid units, there is so much potential now for ground to just come up with these insane late game teams with huge units and a lot of synergy bumps. I can confidently say that ground synergy is a lot more fun than it used to be, and also a lot more late game variety than it used to have, but I also wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the numbers that we see with that synergy need to be tuned down quite a bit. We'll have to see. I might be wrong, but I feel like ground synergy is even stronger than it used to be, and it used to be really strong. So I'm definitely excited, but also a little bit wary of the strength of ground. Okay, let's move on to the other reworked synergy. That's gonna be flora. After we've tilled all that soil, it's time to start growing some plants. Flora synergy will now give you flower pots, which house various flora Pokemon, and these flower pot Pokemon will be thrust into battle when your other flora Pokemon are knocked out. And as your flora Pokemon are knocked out, you will slowly acquire mulch, which is used to evolve your flower pot Pokemon. Once you have acquired enough mulch to fully evolve all of your flora Pokemon, you will gain a Blossom flower pot, and you will also be able to gain a Maze mulch, which will greatly increase the stats of your flower pot Pokemon. The higher the stars of your knocked out flora Pokemon, the faster you'll acquire your mulch. So the overall idea when you're playing with flora is that you want your Pokemon to be knocked out, and you'll be rewarded for very close fights where you're able to win with just 1 or 2 units left. Or you could just fully lose your fights. That technically would give you the most amount of mulch, but your health is finite. The best way to play is to find that healthy balance between winning rounds and having a lot of your units being knocked out, so that you can fully evolve your flower pot units and work your way towards that Amaze mulch. It's a very cool synergy where the players who are best able to balance their team's strength and their flora units will be rewarded the most by getting their flower pots fully evolved. It's a very fun synergy to play, and I can easily say that Pokemon Auto Chess is the best farming simulator of 2025, and that's pretty much going to do it for the big synergy changes. Let's quickly go over the other tweaks to various synergies before we get to the changed Pokemon. Aquatic Synergy has had their numbers tweaked down a little bit, which is totally fair. I've always been a big advocate for Aquatic Synergy, but more as a side synergy over a main synergy. But ever since the Aquatic 8 change, as well as the strength of a lot of the Aquatic uniques being brought forward, Aquatic has just been performing a little bit too well and a little too consistently in patch 6.4. Also add the fact that in patch 6.4, Aquatic pretty much hard countered Ghost 8. That's no longer going to be the case because the Aquatic Wave no longer cleanses that Ghost 8 curse. These changes are hopefully going to bring down the potency of Aquatic Synergy. Fighting Synergy also getting some tweaks to their numbers. Another Synergy that has been performing really well in the last meta, but in my opinion it was more so Human Synergy rather than Fighting Synergy, which was really enabling the Synergy to pop off. But still, small nerfs to Fighting is kind of small nerfs to Human because you always run those two together. So hopefully we're gonna have less dominant Human fighting teams with those unkillable healing Human fighters. Ignore the background footage, I got lucky with an early game payday. And the final change is that the weather rocks for Rock Synergy, a lot of them got some minor buffs, and if there's a weather during a PvE round, the weather rocks that you've already accumulated will no longer be overridden by that PvE round's weather. So if there's ever a situation where you're relying on using a specific rock against a specific Pokemon with a weather set, that rock is no longer going to be lost and replaced when you take on those legendary birds in between you and your opponent's matchups. We'll go over the individual weather rock changes when we talk about items, but for now let's finally move on to the changed Pokemon. Let's start with Pidov's line, got some stat buffs. Maybe it's finally usable, but probably not, let's be real. Sprigatito is now a Grass Flora Dark unit. It's also no longer regional, and that's because Flora Synergy needs some new early game units, with Hoppip being moved to Flora Synergy's Flower Pot. Tynamo's line is also moving to the 1-cost commons. It's still regional, but this gives you some more early game flexibility, and with the addition of Smoliv and Chespin, we've also seen some other 1-costs be moved to regions. Seedot is now only going to show up in dark regions, and Mudkip's going to show up in water or ground regions. For our 2-costs, Capsakid got its PP buffed. I feel like you aren't really using Capsakid for its ability, but it's definitely nice to have. Flabebe also got a ton of different color variants. As far as I know, they're all the same, but it does offer some nice variety, and the sprite artist that did all these variants now gets to see their work reflected in the game. Very nice. Chikorita, previously a 2-cost, is now a Flora Flower Pot Pokemon. It also has a new ability in Sweet Scent, making its role sort of like a support unit in the Flora Synergy. Gossifleur has now been moved to a regional Pokemon for both Sound and Flora regions. And finally, Female Nidoran is no longer going to show up in ground regions, only poison regions. For our 3-costs, the Fomantis line has its grass replaced with Flora Synergy, and Sunkern has some pretty substantial changes. It is now a 3-cost ad pick. It is also now a Grass Light Flora unit, and its ability Solar Beam, which previously was very much empowered underneath the Zenith weather, it is now also empowered underneath a Light Spot, and in my opinion this is really strong. It is really easy to get your Light Synergy active, and with the fact that this ability can hit multiple targets, Sunkern is a very dangerous Pokemon to add to the game. I advise highly against doing it unless you are running a Light Synergy or a Flora Synergy team. I was fortunate enough to try out Sunkern in one of the few games that I played this patch, and even though my Light Spot was in the front line, my Sunflora was able to outduel a Groudon. So yeah, be very careful when you're offered a Sunkern in your ad picks. Galarian Zigzagoon's line got a bunch of stat nerfs, the main one being its PP being increased from 50 to 80. And finally, Lotad is no longer a water type, it is going from Grass Water Aquatic to Grass Aquatic Sound. Alright, let's move on to 4-costs. The only change we have is Doduo getting a small PP nerf. Pretty unimpactful change, so let's move on to the uniques. Both Hitmonchan and Hitmonlee got some small nerfs to their stats. Plusle and Minun are now both Electric Field, which is pretty interesting. I have yet to make a Field 9 Electric 7 team, but that sounds like a lot of fun, and now Plusle and Minun definitely seem to be able to enable that. Duraludon getting a small buff to its PP. And for our legendaries, Zygarde has a new method of changing forms. It will now gain cells from fully dug holes every second, and once it acquires 95 of these cells, it will transform into its complete form. If your board is completely dug out, this will take around 4 seconds, but you probably won't for most of the game, so overall it'll probably take around 5 to 6 seconds to transform, which is totally fine. Overall, I think Zygarde is much stronger with this change. Moltres will now set the weather to Zenith. Ogerpon is now a legendary Pokemon, and every one of its form has a slightly different effect. The Flora one will gain attack stat, the Aquatic one restores HP and PP to allies, the Fire one deals damage to adjacent enemies, and the Rock one gains protect and causes flinch. And finally, Manaphy is now a legendary Pokemon, and Fion is no longer a unique Pokemon. It's got a very cool ability doing a little bit of everything. It deals damage, it steals stats, and it also transfers and heals negative status conditions. And if your Manaphy has an Aqua Egg, it will summon a Phione. Certainly a nice change to see, because previously Phione was kind of a pain to deal with. It wasn't a particularly strong unit, but with the right set of items, it would completely dominate the mid game and also continue to be really strong in the late game. Now that Phione can't be itemized, it's a lot more manageable, and it's actually going to be pretty cool to see when your Manaphy summons one. Meltan's ability now skills with ability, power, and luck. We also have Bellsprout, now moving from Hatch to a Flora Flower Pot Pokemon. And Remoraid, which is fished up when you have a Mantike. It now only sells for 2 gold instead of 3, and Octillery now only sells for 7 instead of 10. I guess Mantike was just a little bit too strong when you used it as an economy machine, but overall, I don't think this was necessarily that warranted. Why you gotta do my boy Octillery dirty like that? I'm just joking. Let's move on to abilities. A bunch of abilities got some buffs and nerfs this patch. Torment, which is Chimchar and Lotad's ability, got some nerfs. Nuzzle, which was Pichu's and now Pachirisu's ability, got a slight buff. Magnet Bomb, which is Magnemite's ability, now inflicts the lock status. Bounce got a small damage nerf at its highest level. And Gulp Missile, which is exclusive to Cramorant, got a pretty significant nerf. It now only damages a single target, and the chance to spawn a Pikachu is only 20%. And that's going to wrap it up for all the changes to Pokemon. We can jump right ahead to the changes in items. First off, there's a few changes to various crafted items. King's Rock now provides a slightly higher amount of shields based on your max HP, and Stardust also has a much higher base shield amount. You pretty much never wanted to craft these items in the previous patch, and you would always try to avoid Miracle Seeds in the early game, but I think these buffs will actually help the Miracle Seed quite a bit. Unfortunately, the ability shield item lost its base shield amount, which is fine because it wasn't really important anyways. It was usually just an item that you put on a weaker Pokemon that you use to bump up your fully itemized carries even further, so not too much is lost there. Razorfang got a small nerf to its armor break duration from 4 seconds to 2 seconds. Definitely warranted, but I suspect that Razorfang is still going to be a great item to pair with other crit items, and I don't really see the crit heavy item combos going anywhere anytime soon. But that's all the changes to crafted items. There are, however, still some more changed items. Big Nugget, which was previously an artificial item that gave ground synergy, it's now replaced with Explorer Kit, which still gives ground synergy, but there's more of an emphasis on digging for treasure here. With the Explorer Kit, its holder will have an increased chance of digging up money. I had some good fun with this item, chaining up a bunch of holes to dig up every round, and I was moving my Explorer Kit Pokemon around on all the holes, trying to get them to be the one that would complete the digging. And we've already talked about the ground synergy rework. Some of the items they can dig up are the Rusty Coin, Nugget, and Big Nugget, which are instantly converted to 1, 3, and 10 gold respectively. And then there's also the Synergy Gems, which exist for Fire, Rock, Normal, Bug, Flying, Ice, Water, Steel, Dragon, Poison, and Ghost Synergies. And not only can you dig these up with Ground Synergy, but you can also pick them up from the Sableye Carousel event, which has gotten reworked. No longer does Sableye come and steal your items. He now offers you the choice of picking up a Synergy Gem instead of a regular item component. And then the Weather Rocks, some of them have been buffed. The Floatstone now gives 10 speed instead of 5 when it's windy. Smelly Clay has an increased chance for your Pokemon to not be poisoned. And the Black Augurite now reduces critical hit damage received even further. And the last two item changes are Signature Dishes. Rock Salt, which is Knackley's signature dish, now gives 15% of max HP as shield. And Sweet Herb, which was Cherrim's signature dish, now gives Herba Mystica, which gives the various synergy field status effects based on the Pokemon eating it, or Rune Protect. And that's everything for our items. There's a few other changes that are worth talking about. The projectiles of ranged attackers is now affected by speed. There's been a few bug fixes and sort of exploit balancing changes. I'll throw the patch notes on the screen, but I know that in addition to these, there's been some additional fixes, like Flying Synergy used to always critical hit with their dive bombs. That's no longer the case, so you'll notice a lot less damage coming in from Flying 8 Synergy. And Spell Crit and Ability Power was doing way more than intended for Fuecoco. That was previously being abused by a lot of people, especially when paired with a Love Disc, but that should hopefully no longer be the case. Other than that, ELO brackets have been slightly revised to reflect the ever-changing bell curve of the player base's average ELO. And new accounts will gain a lot more elo when winning, but also lose a lot more when losing. For the first few games that they play, this was pretty much just to target Smurf accounts. It was kind of annoying when experienced players would make new accounts just so that they can play ranked games against weaker opponents and stomp on them. And a lot of people were doing this specifically to win the victory road races. This is not a perfect solution, but it's definitely going to help a lot. So it's definitely an appreciated change. The only thing I want to say is that if you're a new player and you lose a lot of elo in your first few games, don't get discouraged. Elo is just a number, and if you truly want to learn and get better at the game, you'll definitely get your elo back very quickly. Other than that, there's been some very nice changes to the UI, there's a few new titles to collect, and that's going to wrap up our rundown for a very exciting new patch. Thank you so much for watching, and think before you choose Sunkern as your ad pick, and I will see you all in the next game. Take care.